Today's episode features the amazing Dr. Stacy Chin, who is the CEO and co-founder of HydroGlyde Coatings, where she's working to develop the first ever self-lubricating condom coating, shaking up a 70-year industry stagnation. Stacy and I met on the TEDx stage, where she and I just hit it off, and all these years later, I'm so excited to be bringing her into the amazing Checkbox Other family. Now, her company HydroGlyde was bolstered into the startup space as a result of Dr. Chin's PhD pursuits at Boston University, which we talk a little bit about in this episode. Those pursuits quickly gained momentum with the support of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the NIH, the National Institute of Health. Dr. Chin has a PhD in polymer chemistry and currently serves as an NIH SBIR review. All of those letters, all of those things Stacy talks about today. For those of you that are interested in the sex tech industry, medical devices, if you are somebody that is just like here to talk about the taboo or the whisper issues that we're told we're not allowed to talk about, this episode's for you. If you are a scientist at heart or in practice, oh my goodness, I can't wait for you to hear this episode. And if you're somebody that has an idea that you want to bring to the forefront, I think there are some themes that string all the way through this episode that will hopefully be that extra nudge of encouragement that will help your idea come to that next phase, because we want to hear about it. So if you have an idea that you want to bring to the forefront and you're a little nervous to say it out loud, this is a place to say it out loud. If you want to reach out to us, you can go to nikkyinnocent.com/podcast. There's a button on there that you can join the conversation, and you can tell us about what about this episode resonated with you, or if you have a business idea or an other story that you want to share with us, please do. We want to hear about it, and you deserve to be witnessed. So without further ado, I can't wait for you to hear more about Dr. Stacy Chin. Welcome to Checkbox Other, Stacy. I'm so happy you're here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Nikki. Super excited to be here as well.
I'm amped. So for all of you, you will get a little bit of, you obviously have gone through a little bit of the kind of standard intro of Stacy, but Stacy and I met right before we stepped on the TEDx stage. So I am so excited to get to see her. It's been 4 years.
Oh my, I can't believe it.
About
About 4 years. Wow.
Yeah, it's nuts. So I'm so glad we're here today, getting to be in our own little virtual space, and you're all getting a chance to listen. Stacy, as we normally start this, I pass the mic over to you to take us through what I call the Cliff Notes journey of your life, the ahas, the twists, turns, all of those the moments that have kind of informed where you are today. And you get to take it wherever you want to. So I would love for the audience to hear more about you.
Oh, no pressure or anything. Thank you, Nikki. Oh, so let's see. How far do I go back? So I am a fellow New Jerseyan. I grew up in New Jersey, and it was really good. So I grew up in a small little suburban town, New Jersey, and nothing really atypical there. But then I always had a knack for science and math. Really liked those sectors there. Ended up going to school in a college at Holy Cross in Massachusetts. And then after there I majored in chemistry, really had a great time there. Ended up going to grad school at Boston University for my PhD in polymer chemistry. And when I entered there, I thought of the typical thing, you go in there, finish my PhD in 4 or 5, 6 years, publish some papers, write some grants, do some great research, and then go to a pharmaceutical company. That's what you do after grad school. You either do a postdoc, you go for a pharma company, go to industry, make lots of money, and kind of go off on your merry way and enjoy life, right? So I entered my chemistry PhD program at Boston University. I ended up picking a lab that was super exciting under the Grindstaff lab. So they do a lot of translational research. So pretty much, how do you get science from the bench side to the bedside? And how do you start companies and things of that sort? And so being a naive, young, fresh G1, as they call it, or year one of grad school, you're super buggy-eyed, you're super excited, you want to do great research and you save the world. So we're all coming in with that energy in there, which is great. And in my second year, so backing up, I was working on a project to look at carbohydrate polymers. And polymers are pretty much molecules that are replicates of each other. So molecules attached together in a chain to make really, really long strands of molecules there. So polymers have great features. And so one of them, I was looking at biomaterials and studying these new carbohydrate polymers and their structures and what they can do. um, and all that fun stuff. And so in my second year, my lab had a great opportunity to collaborate with two doctors from the medical campus that got sponsored from the Gates Foundation. And they were trying to solve a problem of how do we make condoms better. So I'm sure everyone listening is familiar. You know, condoms are a great way to protect people against sexually transmitted diseases and unwanted pregnancies. But no one really likes them, right? So they're uncomfortable, they're nasty, there's a smell to them, and they're not really well lubricated. So the idea came about where how do we make a coating that comes in a lot of medical devices, and how we put a similar coating on a condom. And so they came to my professor. My professor came to me and was like, "Hey, let's just start working on this." So this just started as a science project, and it was challenging. The idea of putting a coating on some sort of substrate or some sort of material is very straightforward. But my God, Nikki, like the latex itself is a whole other world out there. It's stretchy, it's flexible. There's not many chemical groups where you can attach things onto. So it was a huge challenge of how do we make a coating that stays on latex, that becomes super slippery when you put water, vaginal fluid, spit, anything aqueous on there,
Yeah.
and hopefully it gives people a better experience.
Right.
And so when I'm working on my PhD project on the side, this is a kind of a side project I was working on as well too. So we did everything underneath the sun. It was me, a couple other grad students, and my PhD advisor trying to truck through towards that. And so trying to put one and one to make two together, and literally we went through 1,000 formulations. No joke, it really was over 1,000 type of formulations, different ways to make the coating, different ways to do that. And it was a struggle to a point where we almost gave up. It was just, maybe this wasn't possible. We didn't know. But then one day we actually put one to one together and finally made two. And we actually had something that might have worked out, which is great after a year and a half or 2 years of prototyping. And this timeline might seem really long, but unfortunately, this is kind of a normal trajectory for any science or engineering based research. And so with that, we decided to form the company in 2015, ended up going for some funding from the government. So the government has a lot of institutions. One of them is the National Institute of Health, which is NIH. And they have grant programs called SBIRs, or Small Business Innovation Research Funds. And these are high risk, highly competitive grants to fund companies trying to make these, high risky endeavors. And so we were really fortunate. After a couple of tries, we got our first big funding. So we got a lot of grants from the Massachusetts ecosystem, which they've been incredibly helpful there. We got one big, around 200 something SBIR phase one, and then we end up getting a $900,000 SBIR phase two as a follow-up to try to help us commercialization. So today we've raised about $1.3 million of funding just to help us in the developmental pipeline. So with that, fast forward to modern day, we now have a team of people in business and legal and med devices and consumer products. We found an excellent manufacturing partners overseas that was super excited about the idea. We have 3 US patents and a couple of other foreign national applications as well. And we've been going towards human trials. So we're currently in the middle of our third round. And we're really excited for the prospects of it. And it's been quite a journey so far, Nikki. I definitely can share many, many stories about that. But that's kind of my Cliff Notes version of kind of how I came to be.
My goodness, I love that so much. It's so funny. There's a couple pieces that come that I love so much, how you were like, yeah, it was just a science experiment in the beginning. And, for any of us that grew up in, I'll say American schooling systems, but I'm sure others, where you were in science class and assigned to do a science project. And like, maybe you had that trifold board or you had to present what it was, like the idea of like, here's a question I have and I want the answer to. Right. And the fact that that can lead to so many different avenues and so many different attempts at solving a problem. But also, I think one of the things that is so powerful, and, obviously, for those of you that haven't watched Stacy's TED Talk, put that on your queue. It is so important, I think, even more so when you're in that spot and in that state of like, we have tried this 1,000 times and it hasn't worked. Am I going to give up? I feel like I should. I've tried everything I've got. And the ability to kind of get back up and try again, I think is so important. The other part that it's funny because I feel like as we were saying this, I didn't know about until my last job as an employee before I went into the entrepreneurial space, where I worked at a biotech and pharmaceutical um, business development fund. And I was fascinated by the fact I didn't really even know how the phases and the timelines within kind of the R&D field worked. And when we are in such an on-demand culture where we're used to things taking no more than 30 seconds to load, or our Netflix to be there, or maybe an Uber can take up to 10 minutes and that's far too long. The fact that these things can take years on years in various phases, and it's just intended for that to be the way things are. And even more so what we've experienced collectively with COVID and with just vaccine creation, of having to watch how those elements within the scientific field, it takes time in order to make sure it's not just about making it, but making sure it's viable, making sure you're going through all the right types of testing to ensure that what you're bringing to market is actually what you say it's going to be. And you have the ability to like see the effects through. So like the resilience you have in the testing, but also just the whole nature of the process, the scientific process on a larger scale that I feel like, again, I started with us being those little kids in the trifold science fair. It's not the reality timeline wise. It's not like a month-long focus in science class. It's years and years and years of investment where you don't really know what the end of it's going to be. And so can you talk a little bit about like what it is to hold that space of uncertainty and to keep kind of pushing forward on a product that, especially a product that so many people either shy away from talking about, or like you said, like no one really likes condoms. Like even when folks are comfortable talking about condoms, there is kind of this like, eye roll feeling to it. How did that kind of go along with what is already a very resilient you have to be very resilient in the process of bringing that kind of innovation to market. So how did those two things kind of dance together, the
Yeah.
taboo and the longer term process?
Yeah, no, these are great questions, Nikki. And so the resilience come in there. And I think that's one of my strengths that I come as a person, whether it's through life or just kind of how I am. I definitely bring resilience and grit, just kind of trucking through hard times and kind of understanding, what's the worst that can happen, and trying to seize opportunity when it comes there. And even just as a scientist, not even just in the startup too. I mean, things fail all the time, right? Like you're going there doing experiment, things are going to fail. You plan things out as best as you can. You try it again, keep doing that. 5 years later, you maybe have something that works, maybe doesn't work, but everything you try gets you closer, hopefully, to an answer that does work. And so that's something that in grad school we had to learn in science. I mean, you take all day, set up these long experiments, and I take hours or even days or even weeks to set up. And one or two things might go wrong and you got to do it all over again. So you build up that thick skin. And so I think with that really helped out, the temperament that you need to have for a startup. And so transitioning from the scientist and to the startup side is a whole other monster as well too, that you have to learn as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And so startup itself, there's a lot of resilience going through, similar in the lab where things might fail, things might not happen. You're gonna see the same thing in business, right? You might make a partnership, you might reach out to a colleague or try to form a consultant, and sometimes it works out, which is great, but many times it's gonna fail, and many times it's not gonna work out. So again, that's the trajectory of that as well too. And now on top of all that, dealing with a taboo subject does bring a really interesting dynamic to that this whole experience as well. And so, like you said, Nikki, in this culture, this is kind of a taboo subject. So depending on, again, who are we speaking to and the interest in this, I mean, there's so many different aspects of this business that's not just sex and condoms, right? There's a market viability, there's the need. There are people out there that are actually struggling in their, sexual intercourse or having STDs as well too, that need something to be preventative. There's people that are interested in investing and want to see the market side of it. So depending on who we talk to, whether it's consumer, an investor, a user, a manufacturer, there's a lot of different and a very colorful variety of different ways we can take this quote unquote taboo subject and kind of make it interesting and relevant to a lot of people as well. So I think for me is I needed to learn, first of all, the story behind everything. What's the need? What's the pain point for customers? Be comfortable. There might be some giggles and some, oh my gosh, who's this girl talking about condoms,
Yeah.
especially in investor meetings. And then on the business side and the supply chain side, what's going on there, and just kind of talking it out, understanding as well too, really helps to, in my mind at least, not make it as taboo, but also just how do we make this subject more relevant and more relatable to people in those different sectors.
Yeah, for sure. I love what I'm hearing through this and through all the elements. I think there are so many different lenses is the power of the story that you're able to tell, whether it be through the context of, okay, let me make a business pitch and show you the numbers, or it be, let me tell you the use cases, or it be like, here's where you fall in the line of how this is important. And here's the larger story that you're contributing to. Are you on board? I feel like, the kind of Shark Tank, are you willing to invest? That feeling of like, I'm trying to get you on board based on where you are. I'm not trying to convince you anything differently. And oftentimes when we don't have experience using language around certain things that are taboo, even just touching and broaching the subject can make it so people block off. And so I think approaching them, like you're talking about, approaching them with the story, approaching them with the humanity of it all actually allows you to step closer to something that feels really far away. So I love that it, like, that is it. I feel like it's your take on so many different elements of this, even as you're talking about like the reason this was an important thing for us to even explore. Here I have like 5 different takes on how this is going to help you. Maybe 4 of them don't even resonate at all. And maybe the 5th, like you're like, okay, I kind of get it. Great. I'll take that little entry point to start, to start moving in that direction with you. So my question for this, I got so excited. I didn't even ask this part. One of the questions I ask everybody is, can you tell us a time in your life where you have felt other or different and how it has informed your journey up until this point?
Oh boy. Do you mean more so like imposter syndrome or kind of like,
Wherever
like,
you want to go. Like
oh,
a lot of
wow.
times people will talk about
Yeah.
kind of either experiences. A lot of times people will be like, okay, here's the first time I felt other or different or as though I didn't belong. Here's kind of a key moment in my life where I realized, oh wait, I'm different than other people.
Yeah.
Sometimes people will be like, well, yeah, yesterday that happened. So go wherever you want to go with it.
Yeah. I think my answer to that is all the time. I've experienced being quote unquote felt other or didn't fit in, or there's an imposter syndrome there ever since just growing up. Even just on the subject of race, of growing up, I grew up and went through schooling, kindergarten all the way to high school, and even college that are majority Caucasian. So I didn't understand some implications at the time of how race um made me feel a little different compared to what's out there. So I think having some of those early exposure of, okay, people do see me or treat me a little differently, but this is kind of just, maybe this is okay. Maybe this is just how it is. Maybe it's just me. So it took me a while to understand what was going on there. But reflecting back, I've always felt there's always an element of quote unquote feeling that like the other or the imposter syndrome in there, and kind of learning how to grapple with that from a young age, going through schooling as well too. And now having those experiences, I was able to expand those lessons learned and kind of go into grad school where feeling like the other, feeling like the imposter syndrome is very, very common. They talk about that in grad school as well too. Am I smart enough to do this?
Yeah.
Do I deserve to be here? This is this for me? And that's really important to have the confidence and say, I do belong here, especially in an academic research culture where it is really rigorous and people do have negative aspects when you say a wrong answer. I remember in my qualifying exam, which is an exam in my second year of grad school, where panel professors just kind of, I want to say attack, but they just kind of question you like no other on your research project just to see how you respond.
Yeah.
And I remember saying a wrong answer and someone just laughed in my face. Like, so, like things of that sort too. And so, imposter syndrome in grad school was a big part of that, and for me as well too. I didn't feel like, was I smart enough here? I didn't graduate with a 4.0 GPA in college, so I was like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? Like I'm so honored to be here, which is great. So grappling that feeling of imposter syndrome and kind of going through the process and building the confidence is also part of the journey as well. And now going towards startup, there's not a lot of people that look like me or have my background in this role, which again is a whole other jungle. And again, I just don't think I would be able to be where I am without those other experiences compounding on each other. So it's for me, it's hard to find another female, a younger female with a PhD and a science background, trying to transition to startup, trying to learn business. And again, it's the whole other thing where now, people are saying, you have a PhD, you don't have an MBA, you don't have any business experience. So now the other is more apparent and frankly a little more direct in your face. So now it's kind of now the new challenges open up saying, how do I personally find that confidence in myself? How do I find people that can support me, that can surround myself with, that sees those strengths in me, that I can do this, and kind of move forward in that direction as well too. So I think imposter syndrome or feeling like the other has been a consistent feeling throughout my whole journey. It's just now in every different chapter, it presents it in a different way. And I guess I'll say in a different intensity as well. But then I just, it's just a constant way for me personally to figure out how do I overcome those hurdles and how do I face those and how do I understand what's coming about. I'm really a big adamant of fake it until you make it. And so, saying I want to be here and just putting the act, the tone, the attitude, saying, I want to be here, I deserve to be here, and just kind of pushing it through does make a huge difference at the end of the day. But yeah, and I'm sure everyone feels the same way to some extent one another though, but it's normal. It's
Yeah.
completely normal.
I love it. Honestly, so when I first came up with the idea of Checkbox Other, I was like, it's something that we all feel at some point in our lives, but that feeling is so isolating that you can't imagine another person has felt it, because the reason it feels so intense is that you feel like you're solo. And you're like, well, if everybody felt like this, why do we have experiences where we'd feel like this at all if we have the ability to come together and say, this sucks, right? So yeah, I think there is so much power in even looking back and being like, I was trying to navigate, like, was that me? Was that what was around me? Even just growing up, hearing like, you're like, I noticed these things were different, but was that just the way things work? And then stepping into, okay, this actually feels the same, but it's got a whole, like, I always think about it like, it's the same character in a different costume, or it's the same scene playing, it's the same like script playing out in a different scene in a play. How these things are showing up. It's like, oh, hi, I've experienced you before. Maybe not in this setting, in this intensity, in this look, but I also know the feeling of it. And I can sit in the kind of the heat of it a little bit longer because I have the experience, I have the practice. So it's not my first time. And when you have that ability throughout your experience, it really is fascinating to look back and think about like, oh, you know what? Okay, cool. So you need me to have these letters at the end of my name, not those letters at the end of my name that I needed the last time. Great, cool, and wonderful. But also those letters aren't the things that are the things that make it so my ideas are valid and viable. They are the things that help me kind of bolster different aspects of what I'm doing, but I am more than valid and viable in showing up in who I am right now. MBA isn't going to make me any more or less capable of what I do, what I know right now. And so I think it is so powerful when you were talking about like all the different aspects of stepping into this current kind of entrepreneurial startup founder kind of space. There are so many elements of all the experiences that you referenced up until that point of being like, all right, well, I'm going to try this out. It's kind of the fake it till you make it, but also I'm not really faking it. I know how to do this. I just might not be presenting the way you're used to somebody who knows how to do this is presenting. And so I think there's so much power in activating that and owning it and being like, yeah, okay, I've been here before. I know what this feels like. It doesn't mean I got to stop or I got to go away. And also, hey, if this is happening for you, if you look like me or you look different from everyone else, like I feel like I look different than everyone else, let's talk about it. Let's actually name this thing that has been so, again, taboo and unspoken for so long. And let's just move forward with the reality that we're operating amongst it and we can still move through it. And so I think there's so much power in that space as a scientist. Like there's a part of me too, like the scientific method is intended for you to be like, here's a problem we're going to solve. We got to actually look at it and understand what the problem is in order to overcome it and work around it. And so I feel like in our society, when we're talking about belonging and we're talking about imposter syndrome or any kind of identity that is blocking your ability to belong, what we tend to do is we look away from it instead of look towards it. And so as a scientist, it's so powerful to think about like, yeah, but I'm trained to actually solve it by being like, what are all, like, where are those, you're talking about the polymers, like, where are they connecting? Where are all the little intricate parts so we can kind of break it down and find a solution? And so all those things together, I feel like is such a wonderful, unique kind of blending of experiences that you have and expertise you have, whether or not there are a whole bunch of letters that at the end of your name that designate those things, because there's so much that's learned and
Yeah.
lived experience that's so important here.
Yeah. And everything you brought up, Nikki, is definitely really important too. And I think for women, especially just in a society that, like just being a female, both in the science and then in the startup space where there's a leaky pipeline and, the amount of women that stays in these spaces do drop out,
Yeah.
and just kind of navigating those cultures and understanding the value in yourself and how to pretty much promote yourself and encourage yourself is super important as well. I mean, there are times that there's so much backlash sometimes where frankly it's true. And I think maybe Hillary Clinton said this where, if a man does something wrong, they might get me a slap in the hand maybe once or twice. But if a woman does something similar to that, the slap is even harder, or the reprimanded is much harder. And unfortunately, I have felt the consequences of that as well too, where, if male colleagues does one thing and may not go right, though, they get paid like something, a response that way. But if I do it, that I feel like way more intense.
Yeah.
And so it's, and unfortunately that's just a society of how it is, especially being a young female as well too. The amount of doubt, the amount of people that's willing to step over you and kind of take advantage because women are more quote unquote submissive or quiet or have these other attributes that they think they do. And so having women to promote themselves and also to encourage others and understand the value that they bring as well.
Yeah.
And have them realize some of the things that people say to you or think about you, they're not true. I've had a couple of times where I submitted a grant saying she doesn't know what she's doing or she's too young, and that's a reason, solely just a reason that she does not deserve this. I had times where my last name was the first name, which is Chin, on a paper, and they say they don't know how to speak English or they don't know how to write in English, and so it's just a lot of these crazy ideas and these perceptions come to play. And frankly, fighting those things on a day-to-day can be exhausting, but it is part of the battle that you say maybe unspoken of throughout this whole journey as well. So that's something that I think needs to be bring to light more than all the accomplishment or successes that everyone has as well too, just so there is solidarity and there is a unison that a lot of people are experiencing this as well too.
Sure. There's two pieces. I feel like you talk and touch upon the intersectional dynamics of like, okay, so am I going to get through all the barriers that potentially could be there? Am I going to get through? Is my gender going to be the thing that makes me disqualified? Is my age going to be? Is my race going to be? Is your assumption of my ability to do things before you even have met me? Are all these criteria that don't actually include me as a human being in your mix? Are they going to fit your biased perspective of how things have been and therefore how things should be? So that I think is one part that is like, even before you're in the room, there's all these decisions being made about you from like old stereotypes and old, like just really outdated shit, honestly. And then there's also the part where you started about the kind of Hillary Clinton, when you're talking about that quote of like the fact that there is this, especially again, I'm assuming in science as well, but I'm not as familiar. In startup culture, there is this feeling of like failing forward. But that failing forward is really through a very masculine and white masculine lens for sure. And so the idea that like we encourage failure. I always think of Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx. She talked about how her father held time at their dinner table to celebrate failure and how important it was. And that was like from the underpinnings of her youth. I feel like that is what startup culture tries to say it is, but the lived experience of anybody that has all of those gates that they have to pass through before they're even able to potentially stumble, fail, or maybe misspeak for a moment. Like there is no such thing as failing forward, because once you make any kind of misstep, you've got to start from even further back than the beginning to be considered anything viable, because again, before you were even in the room, there was some sort of judgment based upon you. And so I love kind of the fact that we get to talk about it. We also, I think there's so much power in representation of like, okay, I've done this before. I know what it feels like and I'm willing to talk about my experience. That means that if you look or feel or resonate with any element of what I just talked about, you're not alone in it. You're not alone in this experience of being like, oh, well, I'm young, so they are not going to, or I have a non-traditional background, or, I don't have a business background, but this is a business that I've created from this incredible expertise I had. Can I step into the role of a leader within this business? Yes, you can. Right. And so much power in that. And then, I think there is like this level of, and going back to your comment about the power of the storytelling as you're talking about like demystifying taboo. Like I think of one of the things as I was thinking about you coming on, it reminded me of this I'm not gonna consumer, I'm not even gonna remember what it is. It's a conference, CES conference, where they had this innovation award for a company that was a sex toy company, and they didn't know, or they acted as though they didn't know what the company was until they were about to give this innovation award, found out it was a woman-led business around sex toys and sex tech. And it was like, oh, I'm sorry, that is inappropriate here. We are not going to give you this award. Yes, all the robotics that you brought to the field, all the things that we thought were important, those things are still important, but we put all these levels and layers of appropriateness in order for you to get the flowers for the work that you did and the advancements you made. Sorry, all of these things that are quote unquote appropriate are stopping us from being able to actually honor and recognize the thing that's actually creating the most value for us as a whole, that we would be celebrating in other more acceptable and appropriate dynamics. That why are they more acceptable and appropriate? I mean, because most of the time things are being seen through a lens of comfort of a very specific demographic. And so I do think there is so much power as you're talking about like stepping into the space as someone that's expected to be quiet and a woman. And, you know, we might not know, oh, we're just so to sex. We're not allowed to talk about sex. Oh my goodness. Science is hard. Like all that bullshit. Right. I think of like 1950s commercial kind of vibes of how, oh, wait, this is all just too hard for my delicate little brain. How powerful it is to step into spaces and be like, no, I am more than willing to talk to you about all of it. I've got questions for you too. Let's chat. Let's have a real conversation about what we're talking about, not who we are separate from it. That doesn't even allow us to have the conversation. So I'd love to hear, as I don't know, I'm sure you're familiar with that experience having happened. How did that like rub with you? How did that, you know, and how did that also kind of map to your experiences as you're stepping into places? You talked about getting funding and even just being in the startup eco space, about like networking. How have those kind of experiences as you're like, hey, I'm the founder, hey, this is what I do, and oh, here's my background. How have those things kind of shown up, and how have, I guess, how have you kind of, as you're saying, fake news, so you make it, how have you charted your path in that space accordingly?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely been a learning experience for sure. How do I navigate all those? It's a really hard thing to navigate, right?
Yeah.
And so what can I do given this is the lemons I've been given with? How do I make lemonade from the situation, right? And so the facts are, yeah, this is taboo. This is about sex. This is everything around as well too. I am a young female, first time founder with a PhD, non MBA. I'm navigating this well too. So how do I take advantage of that and make it into my strength?
Yeah.
And so there are a couple of times doing a pitch application or just doing pitches in my early days saying, and I did everything in very, academic, very research-based way of how I learned how to present during my PhD. And then as I learned more how to pitch more in a business sense, and knowing who my audience is, which frankly is a lot of, older gentlemen, Caucasian, that kind of demographics there, knowing the topic, let's just push it in their face saying, hey, I'm Stacy. I'm the co-founder, CEO of HydroGlyde Coatings. And today we're going to talk about condoms.
Yeah.
Put it right in their face. You're going to see like, oh my God, what?
Yeah.
But the thing is, they remember me.
Yeah.
They get this little reaction that they're not going to get from any other presentation. And that led me to win a couple of pitch competitions as well too. And just saying, hey, this is something exciting. This is curious. I got your interests. Let's talk about what we're doing. Yeah. And then once they know what's going on, you have some people saying, really? Is that really the question? Is this really a problem? Really? So it's a really a new topic, a new idea. But then once they see the credibility we have behind us, all the successes, all the milestones we have hit to date, that's when the eyes gets open and kind of saying, okay, this is actually a serious topic. So I've learned, like, recognize it is taboo, recognize that, I'm a first time founder, own it. And how do we take that, and saying, hey, this is my strength. This is really how it is. Listen up and kind of, this is my story. Are you in or not? So just learning how to take control of that narrative and going back to the storytelling element, is really, really powerful. And again, as a scientist, this is something that I'm not used to, and I didn't know how to navigate that or capture attention. But then it just took some time and some trial error. Again, as something a scientist is used to, trial and error and trying again to get, how do we get that end goal and control the narrative to a point that benefits us at the end of the day.
I loved too how you talked about the different reaction that you get from men and women of just like people just understanding the use cases from a gendered perspective of being like, oh yeah, I can understand exactly how this would work. And other people being like, what do you mean? I don't like condoms anyway. Why are we trying to improve them? Like, can we just figure out a way to do away with them? Or condoms, I never thought about them. They've been the same for decades and decades. How did those trends fall as you're experiencing, interacting with different people across different age groups, different identity buckets? How has like the reaction to this type of work been different?
Oh yeah. I can go days and days on end on this, Nikki. But yeah, it's been a really interesting experience talking to so many different types of people that are connected in this space one way or another. And so I'm my founding team is me and four other men. And so that's been really interesting as well too, where if we go to end users or talk to customers or people in that sector, a lot of women would share with me some of the intimate challenges and kind of what they're experiencing, especially those that are undergoing chemo or those that are older and going through, vaginal dryness, which is a big issue. And those are the things that I can understand being a female with them as well too, and understand a different side of this technology and the importance of that for these pain points that these customers are experiencing, and trying to tell that or trying to communicate that with our male co-founders can be a little uncomfortable. I mean, that is part of the story as well too. So I mean, there are times where there are women in this space that are experiencing this one thing that may not be reflecting or understood by the other. And frankly, in an industry where it's male dominated, this is super important. So one example I have in a different type of technology is I was on a conference call with an academic conference call, and a male was developing a female-based medical device in the contraceptive area. And he was saying the way they're going to use it is going to do this, that, and this and that. And then all the females were like, hold up, that's not how it works. That's not how it's going to work for a female-based thing. So again, understanding the pain points and both sides of the stories is so important, and not just assuming, okay, because this is my experiences, this is how everyone feels it. Understand that it's part of a bigger community and a bigger globe as well too. That even though maybe I'm experiencing this and he's experiencing that or she's experiencing that, everyone is experiencing so many different things as well. And going back to now, as I shared with you, we're doing some usability studies of couples using the product. There's so much different dynamics and so many different variables that now come to play working with different types of people and their past experiences with condoms and their engagement with each other and kind of how they are intimate with each other and kind of everything involved to trying to form a product, which has been very, very fascinating and very interesting to kind of witness as we kind of progress along with this technology.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, I always think about when you're starting a business, it's like birthing a business baby. And so I feel like you even were like in the gestational period before the baby was born, you were creating all the different elements to have it so the baby was able to be born, and the ability to see that baby / toddler going out into the world and actually interacting with other people and getting so much insight back from that exchange and that experience. I mean, there's so much that we have in our healing modalities that are based on somebody trying one thing and the kind of side effect actually provided more benefit than it was intentionally intended for. And so the kind of space to hold space that's wider than what you intended for the other elements that are going to come in is, I think, so important. And that does come with the ability to see outside your own lens and to honor the fact that there are people that have different experiences than you. And like, I love, first of all, I love so much because you think of most of the stories we hear when it's like, oh, the kind of universality of my experience must be yours. Oftentimes it isn't the ability for women to be like, wait, you're talking about you're making something for people that have bodies similar to mine that's different than yours. How about we talk about how that can actually, like, maybe your intent is checking one of the boxes, but there are like 20 other boxes that this solution could bring. But like, we need to open the door for those to at least be part of the discussion. And so there is such an importance, as you're even talking about being a 4-person founding team, having at least one person be of the other gender or the other experience on the other side of the condom is so important. And the ability for people to feel more comfortable and being able to share with people that may or may not have lived that experience and not be constantly feeling like, oh, I'm explaining something that maybe you don't understand, or you only understand it through another woman in your life and not your kind of lived experience. There's so much power in having that representation within even the founding team as you're building this. And so I love that so much. Like, I hope for those of you that are listening, I hope there are elements in your life where you feel like either you feel more empowered to share your experience of some sort of exchange product, anything that you have in your life, so that other people can hear your perspective, but also that you make space to hear other people's, because it's amazing what happens when we have completely different experiences, but we can see through someone else's eyes on how solutions might come to the forefront. So I am like amped about that. Here's something that like I wanted to create some space and hear from you on, because I know, again, we started talking about the length of time for kind of the approval process for scientific advancements, right? As this is happening in COVID, right? So the idea is that you're interacting with people that are kind of in their own space, in quarantine space, in isolated space. But also, I know you talked about manufacturers in other countries. And so how has both okay, people are in their houses, so maybe they're having more sex, maybe they'd actually get the opportunity to like test this stuff out more. And like, okay, we have to interact with strangers. We have to try to recruit people in a time where it's really difficult to kind of be in exchange with other people. And we have to navigate our experience overseas and try to get, with our supply chain issues in general, globally, get all of these things to move forward. So how has the last couple of years shown up and kind of presented itself for all of those different elements that I know you've been working on this for so obviously when you started, you didn't think there was going to be a pandemic at this element of the phase.
Yeah, and we've been working ever since we started the idea. We need to get the human trials. We need to get the human trials because no investor, no partner, no anyone is going to be interested unless you get the human trials. So this is the big milestone that we had to get through. But for a medical device and all the prototyping and things that has to come, there's a lot of things you have to do to get to that point.
Yeah.
And the moment we were able to get to that point was in like February, like January, February of 2020. And it was just like, oh my gosh. But then again, this is just another wrench that startup throws at you, and you just got to figure out, okay, this is out of my control, how we go and overcome that.
Yeah.
And so we're just very grateful. We have very, very good partners throughout this whole thing, both our manufacturer, which it was challenging for them too. They were shutting down, starting back up, shutting down, starting back up, just because of the COVID situation, transmission there. And then we had partners in LA helping us with these trials. And at one point they were really, really bad. Like the transmission rate was super, super bad. And so how do we pivot? Pretty much pivot's a big word of how do we continue forward to get what we need while putting the right safety measures in place. And that took a lot of really intelligent, creative people. And I'm very fortunate to have those on my team to figure out, okay, what's the next step forward? How do we push forward? And so it was definitely very challenging. It definitely delayed us quite a bit. But we are just very fortunate. A lot of startups didn't make past the pandemic. And we were one of them that kind of have pushed or are still pushing through that too. So, I memean, that in itself, I think I have to be so fortunate just to see the other side where we're still alive and okay to date. So it's just another wrench. We have just, okay, this is the situation. What are our choices? How do we overcome that as well? But it's definitely was a huge change of pace for, especially not just me, but for a lot of people as well. And it was a lot of people that affected by this, including us.
It's so funny. I am so amped for what we will learn, or these silver linings we didn't even know were happening in the midst of all this too. Because I feel like, again, you're talking about kind of the experience of creating and bringing a medical device to the world, right? But the scientific process of having these variables pop up that you weren't sure of, and you're trying to control as many variables as possible, but also we had an unprecedented variable, supposedly, right? Unless you were, in 19.
I was like, of course this would happen to us.
Right. And how kind of that I always think about, like, for me, I feel like I can lean back on my athletic background, and I can lean back on kind of my business training for a lot of things that aren't athletics or business that can help inform how I
Right.
approach situations where I feel out of control or where there's uncertainty. And I feel like there's so much benefit. This is where the kind of the MBA at the end of my name, is that what makes me qualified, or is it that like I have a whole way to handle uncertainty, that I can actually see the problem, handle it? Like everything you just mentioned on how you handled that was how you've done, like from, I think of like from college to PhD to coming into like all these different phases. That's the resilience has been built in that process, and that process has kind of it bears fruit, right? And so the ability to be like, I don't know what the end is going to be, but I'm going to trust the process to get me there is so powerful. And so I am like, I'll just say, I'm just like so amped that one, we got to meet, but two, that like the kind of roller coaster that we've had in the last few years is just kind of, at least from the outsider perspective, showcasing more and more how important it is to validate the experiences and the way that you're operating within your business, because they are actually creating longstanding foundational strength through things that feel like, I don't know how to handle this. And so I hope that the folks that are saying, well, where's your MBA, are now realizing, well, here's my like boots on the ground version of the MBA. Like, here's how I handled real life leadership and business challenges, real time, where like, let's look around to all these big businesses that are not actually able to keep employees, that are not able to do all these things. They might have gotten all of the credentials and they have decades and decades of experience and are on the top whatever list, but like, why are they losing 40% of their employees? Why are their products not working? Or even more so, why do they have record revenue, but somehow we're talking about how they need to keep boosting prices? So how are all of these things happening for all these quote unquote experts? And I'm still being surveyed or analyzed based on those metrics that aren't actually playing out. And so I'm just so like, just know that as that comp is happening, I'm like in the back, I'm being like, yeah, Stacy, keep doing you.
You're awesome, Nikki.
Walking the walk, honestly, in this stuff.
And absolutely. And again, it's all about the entrepreneurial lens, right? And to be and walk the steps of an entrepreneur, you do have to change your mindset. And it's not that it's something I should do. You have to do it because things do get tough. So you got to see things very differently. And for me, just trying, how do I take my training from a scientist or my life experiences and transition it towards an entrepreneur? It's been quite challenging, and so many books. I've read so many books, so many YouTube videos, so many podcasts, so many people I engage with just saying, okay, this is a problem that we have, or how do you see this? Or how do I see that? And so that kind of transitions and changes your psyche. Okay. And so if this is a challenge, if this event, let's just say an event happens, right? Do you see it as a challenge, or do you see it as opportunity? And so just even that distinguish can definitely, it's different for sometimes an entrepreneurial mindset, which anyone can adopt in this case of how do we tackle different events, whether it's challenging or not challenging. Some might demand more, some might be more challenging than others, but just you're changing that mindset and your perspective of how do we see these outcomes and what can we do about that. Is really important, because at the end of the day, this is out of your control. So the only thing you can control is how you respond to that situation. And I think having everyone remind themselves, this is really how take control of your situation, because no one's going to do it for you, right? So that's taking the reins on that and kind of making the life that you want, or making the journey that you want, and doing the best you can is all you can ask for anything. So
I love it. And
important. Yeah. Oh, no, go ahead.
I feel like what you were part of, like, there's always an opportunity if like the expansive mindset, the abundant mindset, the curiosity driven, like, let's go growth mindset, right? How are we going to allow ourselves to actually expand into this kind of uncomfortable situation instead of retracting, instead of cocooning, instead of hibernating away from it? And are we able to, as we do that, witness the power that we have within us, rather than looking for the external metrics of approval? Because I do think, especially where we are right now, it's really challenging. Like, the things that normally have been set up with a foundational security are crumbling. And those things that used to give big thumbs up, they're just trying to stay afloat. And so if we're constantly operating, looking for to our left and our right for someone to tell us we're doing it right or doing it well, or giving us the kind of perfectionist seal of approval, we aren't going to be able to move forward in the way that old models have kind of told us the success path is. And so really, I think I love so much as you're talking about, like, following so much of that kind of gut instinct, that intuition that you have, and trusting that what you've come to the table with provides you with enough power and viability to keep taking that next step forward is so powerful on so many levels, right? We're talking about business and entrepreneurship, but this is literally life right now. I feel like all of us
Right.
have
This
been
is all life
offered all of
lesson.
these challenges and
Yeah.
opportunities. And so I love hearing that so very much. The last thing I want to just make some space for, because I thought it was, when we spoke a couple weeks ago, I thought it was one of the coolest things. And maybe this is the extrovert in me that's like been so thirsty and hungry for like being around other people. You moved in the midst of the pandemic. You
Oh
moved to
yeah.
education, and as a startup founder, trying to like build your network, but also as a human being, trying to build a community in a new space. How has that, I know I'd love to hear a little bit about like your techniques that you've used, but how has that experience felt for you, and what has worked, what hasn't, and what would your advice be for somebody that's kind of stepping into a new arena or in a new space, as someone that's potentially doing that very soon?
Oh, there you go. No, absolutely. Yeah. So I moved from the Boston area to Baltimore right in the midst of the pandemic, due to external factors. And it's been hard. I don't know anyone in Baltimore. And like yourself, there is a social component that all my friends in my community, my network, all are all in Boston. And so it was really, really challenging coming to an area unknown. And just kind of figuring, how do I kind of, I don't want to say reset, but like, how do I build that community here that I haven't found anywhere else? And so again, it's taking that initiative and trying to, find who's out there and saying, hey, are there opportunities out there to meet new people? And even in COVID, even though it was super hard, but so I've done things like join Bumble BFFs, and it's like dating all over again, trying to find friends and girlfriends to hang out with. But I mean, that's one way to do it, or just trying to find groups and just kind of reach out to networks out there and see what works and what doesn't work. And so with a lot of trial and errors and trying to meet with different people, I now have a good group of friends I hang out with on a routine basis. And then there's a new yoga studio that opened up too. So that's a community there as well too. So it just took quite a bit of time just to just find those networking, those connections out there. But yeah, it's just kind of put yourself out there, and it's tiring and exhausting, and there's rejection area here and there, but I mean, that's something you got to do in a new area. But and again, it can be really refreshing and really exciting just to meet new people out there and kind of getting comfortable and see who's there to kind of take you about your reign and kind of go on new adventures with. But yeah, no, it's been really an exciting journey so far, but it's been good. It's been hard, but it's been good.
I love it so much. I feel like there's also this element of like, I don't know, but I potentially could be talking about myself. So feel free to be like, no, Nikki, this is not experience. But there is this idea of being in new spaces. So last fall, I went to Portugal for about 6 weeks, and being in a different space felt like I could kind of graduate to a different version of myself, or witness myself in a new space, which is like, oh my God, I didn't know I had the ability to do all this. Or, I had felt a little inkling of this, but there was so much comfort in the routines that I had, and the friends that I had, and the places that I go, and the restaurant I go to, the yoga studio I go to, as you were talking about, and being able to kind of, I don't know if it's reinvent, but it kind of has a little bit of that college feel of like, you're stepping into a new arena, you're finding out what's there for you. You don't even know the types of things you're going to learn. And so stepping into those new arenas, even if you're like, okay, I'm going to do the same. I'm going to go, I always went to yoga. I'm going to go to yoga. I'm going to, do all these things. You're doing them in a new environment. So inherently they're going to kind of level up, or at least graduate you to another phase of that. And so I think there's so much power in you, not only, again, because I can't wait for you to listen to this back, because I feel like so much of this is so like, your process is so clear to me, and like the betting on yourself and the trusting in yourself, even as you're like, hey, you just got to keep shooting your shot with these people, is the same vibe of like, you just got to keep shooting your shot with investors, is the same vibe as you just got to keep shooting your shot with these potential solutions for the self-lubricating condom.
It's not as easy as said, for sure. It is exhausting. There's a lot of energy, and the nose does get to you eventually, but like you say, you got to push through it. You have to push through it and kind of see what happens there. You just need one yes, right?
Yes.
You just want one friend in Bumble BFF. You just need one investor. You just need one person. So
I love
keep
that.
pushing. Yes.
So I just want to say, I'm so grateful for you taking the time. I am so grateful for us, our paths connecting. I am like amped for people to learn more about HydroGlyde Coatings, but also more about you. So one of the things that I want to make sure I take a little bit of time for is like, I hear I feel like you've been dropping nuggets of wisdom and advice throughout this whole thing. What do you feel like if somebody is sitting here like, Stacy, okay, I've got an idea. I want to do this. Like, what would you say is their first step?
First step is to try and do something. Think about it, think about what you want to do, how to go about that, and just do it. I think a lot of people get that paralysis by analysis. Okay, we can do this, but what if this happens, or what if that happens, or what if this happens? Make your best guess and just do something. And that's the best first step anyone can ever do.
Yes, I love it. And hey, if you're listening and that is really you, like hit me and Stacy up. Let us know that you're doing it. We want to hear about it. We love, as we started, we love stories. So, Stacy, for sure, you have so much wonderful experience and wisdom that you can support other people as they're stepping into these spaces. So I'm amped I'm amped to witness all that comes next for you. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. Oh, for all of you who are listening, we're going to put all of the links and all of the things that we just talked about. But and again, I'm going to plug again, watch Stacy's TED Talk. It's so good. So thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you so much, Nikki. It's been a pleasure. I'm super excited to have this conversation with you.
Oh, me too. Me too. Such a good conversation. Didn't she lay like such a wonderful framework on how to handle things? It felt so scientific and so wonderfully like put together. And it's funny because she was like, that doesn't mean it's easy just because I have a process. And I agree. I think there is a part of this that sometimes when things are challenging, it can feel like, oh, okay, if I have an easy button issue or an easy button that I can press to fix this, then it must not be that challenging. And so for the things that are challenging, it must be that I'm doing them wrong and that I haven't figured out an easy way to do it. What I think is so important, especially in coaching, is that if we can create a framework and a mechanism to say it's okay when we stumble and fall, it's actually part of the process, it allows us to keep moving forward. That whole part we talked about failing forward, of stumbling forward, of actually allowing the things that you learn that you didn't expect to be information to move you closer to where you want to be and where you want to grow to next. So I hope this episode resonated with you as much as it did with me. I am coming at it with all this inspiration, and I cannot wait for you to join us for the next episode.